Hello and welcome. Over the last year under lockdown, we've all made a new friend. Internet-based entertainment. OTT platforms have come to our rescue all those days and nights when we were forced to stay indoors. OTT, or over-the-top media services, are streaming media services offered directly to viewers via the internet. You know them as Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hotstar, Voot, etc. Now, Indian content on OTT platforms just boomed, flourished like crazy during the pandemic, across the country, across age groups, and it has not gone unnoticed by the government and political parties. This week, we saw Amazon Prime apologizing and cutting out scenes from their web series Tandav after direct intervention from the government following police complaints in Maharashtra and Uttar Pradesh that alleged that some scenes insulted Hindu gods and goddesses. All of this blurring the line between self-regulation and censorship. It was also the first such intervention by the Information and Broadcasting Ministry since OTT platforms came under its purview in November. Before that, no ministry had direct oversight over them. So whether it's voluntary cuts, these so-called voluntary cuts by Amazon Prime Video's team, or an apology to the armed forces by actor Anil Kapoor and Netflix India for quoting, again I'm quoting here, unintentionally hurting sentiments. This is in the film AK versus AK. These incidents have put the spotlight yet again on the fact that the increasingly popular streaming platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hotstar, they're all unregulated by the government. Does Tandav, becoming the first web series streaming on a major OTT platform, becoming the first to edit its content, mark the government's entry into the OTT space? And if so, what does this mean for you, the viewer? On the show tonight, we'll have Leela Sampson, former chairperson of the Central Board of Film Certification, or CBFC. We have Apar Gupta, he's a lawyer and the executive director of the Internet Freedom Foundation. Karan Thorani, vice president of the Elara Capital, he's an analyst who closely tracks the OTT space. We have Aashutosh Srivastava, a Supreme Court lawyer. Geeta Bhatt, a political analyst who supports the government, and Anand Patwardhan, who needs no introduction, India's leading documentary film maker. So, Apar Gupta, we have at least 15 streaming platforms. This include, like I mentioned, Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, Disney, Hotstar. They all actually currently follow a code of self-regulation, right? This is supposed to preempt government censorship. But the intervention in the Tandav case, what is one to read into this? Does this show that the government is unlikely to leave these OTT platforms to act as per their self-regulatory mechanisms going forward?
Thank you for opening the debate and inviting me to comment on this. While I do not have an insight into the mind of the government, there have been regular statements which have been attributable to the Information and Broadcast Ministry, whereby it has sought to increase the ambit of its legislative power in terms of looking at any kind of mechanisms which are there similar to cinema exhibition as well as cable broadcast towards OTT platforms such as Amazon Prime or Netflix. So there is a likelihood this level of intervention will only increase over a period of time with increased adoption. However, that would be unfortunate given that I think market mechanisms as well as the form of self-regulation and also existing laws. What people do not recognize is that all of these platforms are incorporated entities in India, and there are also provisions under the Indian Penal Code and Information Technology Act which are applicable against them.
Okay, so Karan Thorani, if you could come in here, your stand on this issue, and whether there should be proper legislation that provides for a statutory body to control and some would say censor content, that's an important question. What's your take on it, and how would it even work? Because as Apar points out, is it futile? The world is flat, shows are made for global audiences. You can ban something or censor something, but you can get a VPN, release it in another country, and only some will get affected because others can get Apple TV, for example, if you can, if you can afford it and if you have the ways and means to do so.
Right. So I have a very varied view over here talking about the regulation part. So I am not in favor of a blanket censorship on OTT because I think that's going to kind of obstruct the growth of OTT. And globally the world is moving to digital, and my belief is that very strongly India also has to move to digital, and there is no other way out of that. But I think some kind of self-regulation, some kind of interference in some sensitive topics, wherein the kind of content being showcased, is not correct in terms of facts, or in the terms of having any fake news. There could be some interference here and there, but I think the censorship is something which should not happen ideally for the OTT platform, because I think the creative ecosystem is very different for an OTT versus a television. You get that freedom to make whatever content you want, and I think India's youth is very much wanting to watch that kind of content. There is no second thought about it, because if that wouldn't be the case, you wouldn't see such kind of high consumption numbers in OTT India today. So that clearly goes to show that there's a mindset shift here within the Indian youth, and they are okay to watch such kind of content. And I think we should not, kind of restrict that, towards getting this kind of services to the youth.
But is there a mindset shift in our regulators, in our governments, in our politicians? But so you're basically saying you do think some regulation is needed. My question really was that, is that possible given the medium, given the nature of the industry, being that where content does flow, right? In that context, is self-regulation the best option? Karan?
So self-regulation indeed is the best option, and as I clearly mentioned, because there is so much of freedom, to make the type of content what you have, people are making whatever they wish to. There's no doubt about it. But sometimes what happens, when you are in your creative mindset for making a certain type of content, unintentionally you do make some kind of things which probably would hurt someone else's sentiment. So when that happens, I think that's when the regulatory authorities need to interfere and get things corrected. So that is the only way I think the interference can happen. Otherwise, beyond that, censorship or anything of any kind of more interference on OTT, I think that is going to be a negative for the industry.
People are making their own content, but will that change going forward? Has what happened with Tandav apologizing, agreeing to snip some bits of its show, set a precedent? Let's go across to Leela Samson though. Ms. Samson, before I get your take on whether regulation is required or not, your reaction first to Amazon Prime, the makers of Tandav this week apologizing and cutting out scenes from their show in the face of criticism.
Actually, I've been a little busy. I haven't been involved in this controversy at all. But I don't think anything has changed, Sarah. The issue remains the same, that there will always be some sections of society, as you say, who will object to something or the other, either in a book or in a film or on television. Or the issue is, should the government get involved? And then it becomes censorship, or should every individual use their right to say no? If I don't want to read Jayadev and Kalidas, who wrote some very sensuous and very beautiful work, I have a right to just put the book down. Are you going to say no to so many sections of our mythology? If that mythology was written today, would sections of our society object to it? Yes. If Khajuraho is built now, would sections of our society object? Yes. But can you say no to going to Khajuraho? Absolutely. Can you switch off the TV if there's what you consider to have bad content? Yes. So it's now going to come down to the same thing, which is every individual has to use their right to say no or yes to content.
But before the product gets to the individual, is there a role for government? There is a self-regulatory framework that OTT channels abide by. But is regulation needed at all? A little bit?
Why would you want the government to lay down norms? It's almost impossible to do that. It's such a difficult thing to do. This is what I'm saying, that I think we're always barking up the same tree about the government interfering. We want them to interfere some sections, other sections naturally do not want them to interfere. Why aren't individuals taking responsibility for their choices? That's what I'm saying. Why when you don't behave with the maturity that they're entitled to?
Well, the audience has the maturity, you should leave it to them. Lastly, Ms. Sampson, you know, several filmmakers and audiences have really shifted to these platforms because of the freedom and the variety of content on offer. But, you know, there have also been concerns about some explicit violence, sexual content of some of the offerings on streaming services. Is there a middle path?
Tell me one thing. In everyday life in India, for a young girl, has she ever been protected from sexually explicit behavior? It's in everyday life. It's happening everywhere. She's exploited, she's in fear, she lives in fear every day of her life. So in the house and outside, why are we only talking about artistic mediums?
Geeta Bhatt, why are we only talking about artistic mediums? The government is only focusing on artistic mediums, not the reality on the ground. We've had Piyush Goyal, Babul Supriyo of the BJP, they've all recently openly said that OTT platforms should not have what they're calling unlimited freedom in its content. Why? Why an opposition to this current system when you have self-regulation?
Well, you see, as far as, any form of artistic form of expression, whether it is theater, whether it is movie, there have been, time and again it has happened that as, we just heard Leelaji also speaking that there are certain sections which are going to come and object. For example, I remember, it was in it was not just a matter of today, even in 1970s. When Elite Padamsee was directing Jesus Christ Superstar, that famous play, he actually had to, change his direction of the play and also the poster, and he had to actually first show it to the church authorities before making it public to be watched. And it has happened, in some other content also. So time and again, these things have been seen that wherever there is an objection from the society, the point is that, the over-the-top platforms which are available today, they are very popular among the youth, and, everyone uses it because it is much cheaper even than direct-to-home services. However, the kind of content that is being shown, that the government has time and again been receiving many complaints in terms of that the content is unregulated, it is sexually explicit, at times it is vulgar, and the existing laws, it is only the MeitY, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, which had any jurisdiction over the digital media, but that too only in terms of the technical aspect and not in terms of the kind of content that was being shown. And since there have been people have been feeling offensive about certain content, and there have been complaints. So it is not a matter of curbing anyone's freedom, but at the same time giving redressal. Redressal to the grievances which have been raised.
Now, as Leela Sampson points out, don't watch. You're paying for the service. It's not like, a television channel where everybody in the house has to sit and watch. You can choose what you want to watch. There are separate accounts for kids. There are separate accounts for adults. But you talked about the content. Many also say that the content has also gained critical acclaim globally. Unlike the content provided by cinema or television that's regulated by the CBFC, the BCCC, etc., OTT platforms have no regulatory body to control content. Consequently, we see a different product, many say, right? For example, we've seen great cutting-edge shows on OTT platforms. Delhi Crime won the Best Drama Series award at the Emmys. This is the first ever Emmy for an Indian program. Apar Gupta, is that likely to change if there's more regulation?
Yes, we are putting that tremendously at risk. I think OTT platforms are providing an innovative basis for us not only to cater to audiences domestically here in India, more often than not people who are young, people who do not find formats which are, or content which is aimed towards cinema exhibition or television to be entertaining or engaging, not because they are bland in terms of delivery and this vulgarity on OTT platforms. It's because OTT platforms come with this different kind of artistic sensibility, which comes with that freedom. If you just look at the BCCC's self-regulatory code by itself, and also the enforcement which has been done on entertainment in mainstream television, it leaves very little what people can actually watch. Now, this impacts creators in a way in which there's always a boundary within which they work then, and there's always some measure of distance between that boundary to insulate yourself from risk. In fact, the minute lawyers get into the creative decision making process, creativity in fact exits the room, which is why OTT platforms today, it's not about the vulgarity, it's about the flexibility which is missing right now in cinema as well as in television broadcast. The second point I would just like to quickly make is that what is the objective of the regulation you are looking for? Is it to cater towards the sentiments of people who are getting offended? Wouldn't it be simpler for these people to just close a tab or look at some other content which is already there amongst the thousands which is available now on OTT streaming? And finally, I would just like to point out that the distinctions, while they may be there, we are also looking at instances in the pre-existing systems of censorship, even with cinema. Only a few months back, we had the entire Padmavat controversy that even the most stringent forms of censorship, regulation, in fact, licensing, will not satisfy a mob which is feeling offended, and that level of offense, the more you feed it, the more that hunger grows.
The more you feed it, the more it grows. Let's go across to Anand Patwardhan, who has been at the receiving end of a lot of this. Anand Patwardhan, you spent decades tracking the rise of Hindu nationalism. I watched your film Ram Ke Naam as a college student, and how times have changed. Now you're forced to hold screenings in secret. 2 years after premiering at the Toronto International Film Festival, your latest film, Reason, remains unreleased in India. I read a quote of yours in the New York Times where you said you want your films to be watched. So have you thought of OTT platforms? Have that encouraged you, and have these latest moves, discouraged you?
I have thought of OTT platforms. They would be perfect for my film, especially the last film called Reason or Vivek. But unfortunately, the OTT platforms that are in India are all afraid of the government, and they're afraid of showing my films. And so even though at this moment the OTT is not being curtailed, I mean, there's no censorship being applied to the OTT platform as yet. But already we have an atmosphere of fear amongst the owners of these platforms, where they see content like mine as that this might create problems for them, because they understand what is going on in India. We are being ruled by a particular ideology that, in my view, is against the Indian Constitution, is against the spirit of the freedom fighters that brought us freedom, which was meant to be an inclusive society. It was meant to be a multicultural society. And that is not what is being propagated right now. So when you make content which reflects the reality in this country, it's going to be hard to show it. And it is hard to show it.
And you've been still doing that. You've all your films touch on inconvenient themes. Every documentary that you've made, you've had to approach the court to ensure that it's shown without restrictions, right? Your films win publicly funded awards, but efforts are made to limit their viewership. What would you say to Karan Turani, who started the show by saying that you can't have, unfettered freedom, creative freedom? There has to be some regulation.
Yeah, but who is going to do the regulation? If you give the regulatory powers to an ideology that itself is very narrow-minded, very medieval in its outlook, then you're in trouble. I mean, what would you do if you were in Germany in the 1930s? Would you give the power of that censorship to Adolf Hitler and his party? I'm not saying that we are exactly in the same situation right now, but we are headed that way, because the government and the party in power is trying to control every institution. OTT platforms is one that they haven't yet controlled. So I would fight for its independence, even though they don't put me on their platform because they are afraid. But at least some content gets in that other people have made. And I think that's right now, that is one of the last spaces left. The internet is one of the last spaces left.
The internet is one of the last spaces left. Aashutosh Srivastava, then why is India looking for ways to regulate online streaming content? Because the service providers already have to display elements. It says clearly nudity, drugs, sex, violence, etc. It's all there, these descriptors and mechanisms for access control, child locks, so on. All of that is already in place, isn't it?
According to me, the Constitution of India gives freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1). But at the same time, our Constitution also restricts and imposes, kind of restrictions under Article 19(2). So obviously, everything has to be regulated as per, our constitutional rights have to be utilized in a proper way. Obviously, there could be, child lock and things like that, but even the children have like accessibility to all these, OTTs, and they are watching things which contains abusive language. There are provisions also in law, like Section 295A is there, when there is any religious hurt, if it is hurting the sentiments of religions, that is a punishable thing. But what about the regulation part? If somebody is showing any obscene, then Section 293 is there of IPC, but there has to be some self-regulation. However, recently with this government of India, recently the government of India has made certain amendments in allocation of businesses rules 1961, whereby it has given some powers to the government of information and broadcasting ministry, who can make who can try to regulate these kind of contents. So I think self-regulation is very much important, because unless once these kind of
okay, self-regulation is important.
Yes,
but
because once it is released, now we see that the problems starting. People are complaining, a lot of violence happening here there, because some contents have been shown which are not up to the mark, or it is hurting somebody or somebody's sentiments. So all these things can be stopped. All these things can be managed.
But who decides? As Anna Patwardhan points out, who decides what's appropriate, what's inappropriate? I'll get to Geeta to end the show with answering that. But Apar, ironically, the makers of Tandav actually, Anna Patwardhan also touched on this. They weren't actually asked by the government to make any cuts, right? They did so on their own because of, I'm guessing, the atmosphere around them. And given that there's no regulation governing them, they didn't really have to make these cuts. They've done this on their own. So, and what happens internationally? Surely India can't be the only ones regulating online content, right? The OTT industry has grown internationally, globally, especially in this pandemic year.
That's correct. That's correct. So India is quite a bit of an outlier here, because the first thing to notice is that self-regulatory mechanisms are the way to go. There are certain sectoral requirements for all kinds of film shootings. For instance, animal cruelty, etc., shooting in public spaces, using minors within any kind of film shooting. All of those are industry-specific rules which always attach. They even attach to OTT platform shootings. Okay, you can't escape them. Labor regulation standards, etc., all of them apply. So this entire debate, which is structured sometimes about a lack of regulation by itself, and regulation being some very good thing, sometimes it's a byword for censorship and increasing government control. The second thing I'd like to point out, specifically in the instance of Tandav, is that quite often the makers made those cuts after FIRs was registered. Police teams from Uttar Pradesh are dispatched to the house of the director. Okay, and this does seem to be something excessive, right? It seems to be a form of how laws, rather than being reformed, the hate speech law which is being used now, rather than being reformed, it's actually being applied towards a new medium, towards restricting artistic choice and creativity. And if people are getting offended, they are getting offended more and more on a much more regular basis due to political patronage. And I'll be fairly candid here. just one sentence. It seems to be on the rise in recent months and years. It's not like it's going away, even when self-regulation or any kind of cinema-style censorship will be brought
Well, we have a comedian who's in
Yeah.
jail for a stand-up act he was going to make, supposedly. That's
Yes, he never made that joke. So I'm just making this point to illustrate that how even regulation, cinema-style censorship will not quell a person who seeks offense and invites offense even when none exists.
all right. Well, thank you all for joining us on a show where we believe it's important to speak up, but also important to listen. We're going to leave you with this thought. Should the government be wrapping out a regulatory framework for streaming platforms, bringing in a list of prohibited content, no-go areas, and will this constrain creative freedom? Will it hurt consumer interest? Will it hurt our choices that we have? Will our content become more sanitized? Will it become more mediocre? Will it become more like what we've seen over the last few decades on general entertainment television channels? And if so, where does that leave you? Something to think about tonight. Bye-bye.